No quest and no adventure is successful without the thrill of being on the cusp of something, without the thrill of being in front of a portal that gets you to the unknown, without the feeling that you are in front of something huge and something different, something that will probably surprise you, but will open the doors, metaphorically and physically sometimes, to a whole new world. This is basically Feywild, and today we will be talking about Fey crossings, Fey portals, and on the topic of how to even get into Feywild. The Dungeon Master's Guides give us some brief and rather not robust explanations of what Fey crossings are. According to two short paragraphs that you find inside the core book, Fey crossings are, and let me quote please, places of mystery and beauty on the material plane that have a near perfect mirror in the Feywild, creating a portal where the two planes touch. Like other portals between planes, most Fey crossings open infrequently. A crossing might open only during a full moon, on the dawn of a particular day, or for someone carrying a certain type of item. Now, as mentioned before a second, this is somewhat an explanation what a Fey portal might be, but we can do much better. And I believe that the new book that we will get from Dungeons & Dragons this autumn, The Witchlight, might give us some more insights on exactly that topic. But before we get to that, we could maybe develop something on our own, basing similarly as in the previous episode on folklore, on mythology, and on myths that you can find in your own region or in literature and art. In fact, in our history, in the history of our ancestors, Fey portals or portals to the other world were quite frequent, although mostly that they were very, let's say, unreliable in their nature. So there were many stories about special places, especially in the woods, that would be a portal or an entry to a different world. As I mentioned in the previous episode, it was a rather common occurrence that someone has gone missing in the woods, got caught in the current of a river, or got eaten by wildland animals or something like that. It wasn't so uncommon that people just got lost in the woods. So the basic and most common way to get into the Feywild would be to wander inside some old forest and find a special place inside that forest. Now, the definition of special here is very broad and has very many points at which we could that we could use in our games. So it could be a special glade inside the forest. If you find a flower bed on a rocky cliff, for example, that would be probably an entry to the Feywild. You could look for strange looking stones. So for example, if you have stones that are set in a circle and look very old and very natural, but at the same time the pattern is somewhat unnatural, that could also be an entry to the Feywild. So we're looking for special and inconvenient places that are connected to nature in one way or another. Now, this is a very common trope that the Feywild must be connected with the nature or the natural part of the world. That comes from our trials with understanding the natural world and natural phenomena. So we always connect something that is natural but yet unnatural at the same time with exactly a possible Fey portal. There are also two, let's call them types of entries. One is a straightforward portal that just is in one place and takes you to the other place at the same time. So one moment you are in this plane of existence, and the second moment, the second you are in a different plane of existence, this in this case the Feywild. So you could imagine that such portals work as, roughly putting, doorways or simple doors. You open the door on one side, step through, and you are in a whole different place. The other popular myth is that entrances to the Feywild are somewhat gradual and not so direct, not so immediate. So what you would get if you take this understanding, or if you take this type of understanding how Fey portals works, would be, for example, going into the forest and following a shimmering light somewhere in front of you, and gradually you start to disappear for an outside eye. You don't feel or see the difference yourself immediately, but for the outside, you either vanish in an instant or start to gradually be more ethereal and more invisible in a way as you progressively get deeper into the Feywild. And there's a moment when you are in the Feywild already, and there's no turning back usually. But about exiting the Feywild I will talk in a few minutes. Let's now focus on entering the Feywild, and let's have a quick look on different types of entrances that you could use in your games and in your stories. If you try to Google how to enter the Feywild, the most common thing that you will find is find a ring of mushrooms, or a rectangular, or a fairy ring, so called. It usually is circular. It doesn't have to be an exact circular pattern. It can be broader than you think, so it doesn't have to be like, I don't know, 5 feet wide. It can be 20 or 30 feet wide. It can be a big portal. It doesn't have to be necessarily small. That's the basic thing that you will find basically everywhere, and it just so happens that such portals exist, and by this I mean that it is a natural phenomena that some mushrooms grow in such a circular pattern, and you can easily find it, and it does look otherworldly. So I do understand our ancestors that they might think that this is something from a different dimension. Unnatural openings in a very thick thicket of trees or bushes. That's also something that might be considered a Fey portal. And if we are talking about such openings during night, if you are in a forest or some other sacred place, a singular ray of moonlight might also be a way in which you can enter the Feywild. A very common trope that you will find is Fey arches made from either one piece of a a tree. So you have a huge tree, dozens of feet wide, let's say, and there's an opening in the middle that looks like the tree is hollow, and you enter the hollow tree, and you are in the Feywild. Another option is two trees that mingle in a way and are and form an archway for you in a more coherent way than a hollowed out tree. Something that has been used in some pieces of literature and sometimes also in movies, I believe that graphic novels also use this idea from time to time, is a single wooden door standing somewhere in the middle of the woods. Very often it will be so that you open the door, you go through them and nothing happens, because there are sometimes conditions on which you can go into the Feywild. But about that I'll talk in a minute. A common trope would be a cave behind a waterfall, or waterfall that is parted. If you have a natural rock formation that prevents the water from falling exactly down on in a waterfall, you can go straight forward, and sometimes you go through the stone, through the rock that is underneath the waterfall itself, and sometimes you find a cave behind the waterfall, and the moment you go through the water and let the water wash over you, you are in a different wall. I mentioned hollow trees. It can also be a hollow tree trunk. That's also something that is very, very common. Small pools that are perfectly clear or have a bluish or greenish tint to it. Sometimes you also can find places where the moon reflects from some kind of puddles or some kind of pools exactly, and if you jump into the moon, so you roughly go into the moon straightly, you can enter the Feywild also by such means. But entrances to the Feywild don't have to be connected with the natural forests. You probably noticed that basically every portal or type of portal that I mentioned before a second is connected to a forest. That doesn't have to be that way, and it's up to your creativeness to do something about it. If you don't feel like you want to have your adventurers go into the forest to get into a portal, you can construct your portals basically anywhere you want. You just need to give them some kind of very specific conditions, and you need to stick to those conditions, because what the Feywild has to have is its strangeness. If you strip Feywild from the strangeness that it has, it becomes basic prime material world in Dungeons and Dragons, because basically we have a world full of dragons, zombies, ogres, goblins, orcs, and other mythical creatures. So to be even stranger than that, you have to be really, really strange. But as mentioned, you can have your portals in other places. So if you have, let's say, a sea adventure, your party of adventurers are pirates, and you want them to get into Feywild, well, you could use some popular tropes, like the trope from Pirates of the Caribbean, where you have a ghost ship that just appears on the top of the ocean every third day or every 7 years or every something. You could have a special ritual that either attracts Fae or opens a portal, and you could, for example, take some books that were written and use Fae in a rather interesting way. So for example, if you take Dresden Files, the fairies over there, they love pizza, but they also like blood. So if you are in an aquatic or a naval scenario in your game, maybe a way to open the portal is by cutting your hand and using your blood with bread, with white bread, and throwing it to the ocean while it's full moon, for example. That is something from the top of my head. I probably could think of something a little bit better, but this is the broad idea that you can have with opening portals to the Feywild. You can have portals also in urban environments. So let's take a shadowy alley, and I believe Neil Gaiman used this idea a couple of different times, that you enter specific parts of shadows where the shadows meet. So you go to the end of the alleyway and you find yourself in a place that looks like it's a dead end, but if you take a step forward, you enter the Feywild like this. Sometimes you can use, if your adventurers are a little bit more fun oriented or comic oriented, you can use animals to get inside to the Feywild. So let's take an example of an owl or a pigeon. Maybe to get to the Feywild, you need to ask for permission from a pigeon that lives and is the king of the city, and the protector of the Feywild portal that is in this place and always was in this place. There wouldn't be creatures like darklings if there wouldn't be Fae in urban environments. This is what I'm saying is that the idea that Fae are strictly connected to nature alone is, in my opinion, and this is my very private opinion, is somewhat harmful for potential ideas that you could come up with. I feel that there's a lack of urban Fae, and there's a lack of this reflecting of the material plane that we have in Feywild. I will, and I promise, I will get back to that idea later during the series, as this is one of the most interesting parts of the Fae material plane relationship for me, the way in which the Fae could react to the material plane technological advancements. But I'm getting sidetracked again. Let's get back to the portals. Portals sometimes will open only if you meet the specific conditions, and this is something that you could use to restrict entry to the Feywild for special heroes and special people that meet the conditions that are often very, very, very strange. So the entry might be open only during full moon. The entry might be open only if you are in a state of very hot emotions. You are in the state of a huge fear or love. If you feel something that is a very, very strong emotion. It could only be open during a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse. A very cliche trope would be following a rainbow or going to the end of the rainbow, or other natural phenomena. So follow the storm, follow the tornado, follow something else. There are many conditions that you could make for this type of activity, but I strongly advise you, and I will try to convince you during this series, that you could most definitely benefit from looking in your own folklore, mythology, and literature that has been written about the Fae, and use fairies very, very often. For example, from my background again, to enter the other world, or to let the other world enter the prime material plane, you need to have a very specific time in your yearly calendar. So it's the equinox, it's a full moon, it's the third full moon from something. We have a very date and calendar oriented way of understanding how the Fae interacts with the material plane, and when this crossroads and when this weave is the most fragile and open to manipulation. But you could make it so that it's connected with the first flowers that bloom on a specific plane. You could connect it with the first snowfall, for example, if you're playing a winter court Feywild. You could have it that only if the wind blows from the left to the right side, you can enter the Fae. Sometimes it could be easier. It could be only at dusk, only at dawn. It could be only one day in each month. It could be only on full moon. It could be only during solstice, only during equinox, only if you offer food, only if you offer wine, only if you offer water from a sacred grove, only if you offer a tear of a child, only if you offer a story, only if you offer a story read to a child or read by a child to you. This is just a couple of ideas that you can use in your games to make things more interesting and more natural. As I mentioned in the first episode, as long as your table on a subconscious level understands things, understands that this is something that derives from folklore, this is something that I guarantee you will bring you a lot of joy in your game. If you are wondering how to find such a place, such a portal, The best way would be to ask local citizens or local farmers, people that know the place. They will tell you this is a sacred forest. Don't enter the forest unless you want to get lost in it, unless you want to get kidnapped by the Fae, unless you don't want to return ever. By the way, the portals and the thing that I mentioned in the beginning, that they exist in a mirror-like state in the prime material and in the Fey material, in the Fey plane. This is also a reason why, for example, we have this trope that dryads are very, very protective of their sacred groves and their sacred trees. Not only are they connected with the trees personally, on a personal level, but also if you change the landscape on one part of the portal, if you destroy the door on one side, the door will be destroyed also on the other side. So destroying a Fey portal, changing, altering the specifics of the environment too much might destroy a Fey portal. So there's also something like this which you can use in your games. If you have your players enter a portal, you can just destroy it a week later by some wild foresters that cut down all the trees, and thus they destroyed the Fey portal. But as mentioned, asking the locals is the best way to get an understanding where the sacred and forbidden places are. They will tell you where to not go, and you want to go there if you want to find your Fey portal. Now, getting outside of the Feywild might be slightly more difficult. It's not said, and most lore agrees with this, that entering the Feywild is not as hard as exiting, because the portals don't function the same way on that side of the yellow brick road. It's harder to get outside because of a few reasons. You don't know the conditions. The conditions can be so strange. The conditions can be so eerie, so ununderstandable by a human or humanoid mind, that it's nearly impossible to use the same portal again. While on our side, it might be as simple as a drop of blood and a loaf of bread set down in a sacred grove during a full moon. It can be as simple as that. On the other side, it would need to be a drop of blood of a firstborn archfey, and not a loaf of bread, but all the loaves of bread in the world, and not a full moon, but the last full moon that exists. And you need to work your way around this to get an understanding how hard it can be to get outside of the Feywild. To get outside, you would need probably help, probably from an archfey, someone that is in a superior position in the Feywild, someone that can shape the reality around them and make a portal appear open or something else. Well, obviously you could use strong magic. You can use wish, or you could use plane shift or things like that in Dungeons and Dragons, for example. Yeah, that's a more obvious way out. But if you want to go easy on your adventurers, if you want to make them have a good time for a few days and then just go home, you could have them shape the world with their emotions. So they have to wish to go to home so much that Fey portal opens for them in a totally random place. But again, that's one thing that you can do. You can also just make them stay in the Feywild. And there are conditions that you could use in many other different situations involving the Fae. So you could have the players exit the Feywild only under the circumstance that they give up their most sacred memories, or enter the Feywild only if they vow to give their own face to the Fae for 3 days, or that they will be in depth of the Fae. About Fae depths, bargains, and so on, we will talk in one of the episodes of this series. But this is also something that can be used as a wild card to get inside or outside the Feywild. Something that you could take from a 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons lore is the Worldfalls idea. So it's an idea that there are places and there are ley lines, let's say, that are so powerful that the portals are somewhat constant in those places, and whole cities ride the Worldfalls. So they enter in one side in autumn to get outside each summer, and they go back to Feywild and the Prime Material Plane and perhaps other planes in each season. So you can imagine a whole elven Feywild city that is riding from one world to another world, and you have to be in the precise moment in time that one day in each year that the city appears and people crowd, and that's the only day when you can, for example, have market with and exchange goods with the Fae elves. That's a very, very cool idea that I think has been ditched actually in the 5th edition, but I believe it's a very, very, very interesting concept that could use some love. Before we finish today's episode, I would like to talk a little bit about the Fey geography that you can encounter in your Feywild. Now, this is something that I'm not sure if I'm going to expand in one of the future episodes, as this is something very specific for your campaign. As the Feywild is a mirror realm, an echo of the Prime Material Plane, it might be that your material plane looks so much different than my material plane, it might make absolutely no sense for you. That's what I'm talking about. But I want to give you a couple of ideas of how traveling in the Feywild and geography of the Feywild might look like. So, as stated earlier, the Feywild must be very strange, must be odd, must be awkward, must be magical. The Feywild is something that you, when you take the material plane and ramp up every single aspect of it. So the colors are more vibrant, the emotions are stronger, the creatures are more bizarre, the convictions are definitely stronger also. Things are bigger, everything is more. The Feywild is the land where everything is more. For us in our world, we establish borders and understand the world with borders exactly. So we understand the world with our walls, with our political borders, with our bodily borders, with distances. Something is 500 yards away, something is 10 kilometers away, something is 5 feet tall or 10 feet tall or something like that. The Fae might understand such things in a little bit different way. I would say that according to the 4th edition lore, I find it very accurate. They understand their surroundings and their environments with conditions. So go straight forward until the 3rd moon shines, or it will happen when the human will ride a griffin. Conditions that are, well, slightly awkward, but what is not awkward about the Feywild? And in the Feywild, you might find very, very different, interesting landscapes, and it's a place where you can run your imagination wild. You can have a forest where time stops, or where time goes backwards, for example. You can have an enchanted river with magical stones that are form a bridge, and each stone that you step on, you have to make an agreement or a bargain with, unless you don't want to stay in the river forever. You can have a forest or a grove with ginormous sunflowers, and bumblebees are inhabitants of that place, and the bumblebees are each 2 feet wide and 5 feet long, for example. You can have magnificent trees that are talking, walking, or are considered to be the queens or kings of the specific territory. It's worth to remember that often certain environments or regions in the Feywild will be influenced by Archfays living there. I'm not going to delve into what Archfays or who Archfays are this episode. It does come with the name, so I understand. I believe that we all understand what an Archfay might be. It's almost a demigod that can shape the reality around them, not by will, but more by emotions and by what they represent. So the Prince of Winter will obviously have a winteresque surrounding and a winter palace and so on. And a fae devoted to the emotion of joy might have an enchanted dancing grove where if you enter the grove, you must dance. You are under influence of Otto's irresistible dance, for example, the spell. You get the idea what an Archfey can be. If an Archfey embodies an idea of something, the idea of joy, the idea of work, probably not the best example, the idea of craftsmanship, the idea of sadness, you will have the surrounding represent that emotion also. And because of this weirdness of the Fae, it's nearly impossible to map the Feywild. Now, there have been maps of the Feywild, and people use them, and I absolutely understand that, and I believe that I will build my own map for the Feywild when time comes, but probably more for me than my players. You have to understand that while you can count by hexes or by distances how much time would you need to get from point A to point B, in Feywild, time doesn't exactly want to hear you out, and the distances, 20 miles, that doesn't mean much in the Feywild, could not mean much in the Feywild. The more important thing is that you want to get from point A to point B, perhaps via point C. That is the more important and interesting part. So if you hear that something is 5 days towards X, well, it might be 5 human days, but what is a day in the Feywild where there's eternal twilight, for example, or eternal noon in some place, or the moon just sits next to the sun? That can also happen. What does 5 days mean in this specific situation? Nothing. If you want your players to travel through the Feywild, you would rather need to figure out a mechanism, a mechanic, or just get an idea of how and why you want the travel to look like this. What I suggest is simply having point A, point B divided in 20 sections, and have the players roll a d20, perhaps minus charisma or plus charisma if someone is leading the group. Perhaps you have a 20. Perhaps you have the distance is from 1 to 20. You have the player roll a d4, add their charisma modifier, and that is how far they get. And they need to get a general of 20, a sum of 20 to get to from point A to point B. You don't talk about days, you don't think about days, you don't think in the terms of long and short rests in the Feywild. You don't have to. Obviously you can if you want. But this is a mechanic that you can use. So instead of distances, roles based on charisma, based on wisdom, maybe wisdom checks, we will talk about the influence of the Feywild that it can have on you later during the series. But this is one of the mechanics that you can use in your games. And to clear things up, when I said from point A to point B, you have 20 fields or 20 points. You just assign the different encounters, social, combat, exploratory, and other encounters to each of these points that they can end up on every day. You don't have to narrate that on the end of your journey on the first day you encounter a wild grove where pixies and satyrs are having a rehearsal, and you hear that the music is off and they ask you to help them in their performance. You don't have to do that. You can just say that on your trip something happened. Those distances or those points that they encounter on the way don't have to be full days of travel. Last thing from this part, again, as a broken record, I will repeat this. I do encourage you to dig into your own folklore mythology and into your own environment, into beliefs. Urban legends are also magnificent for this, and use those things and those aspects of traversing the worlds that are known on a subconscious level by your players. And if you come from a culture where you have to make an offering to get to the other world, do it. Make the offering, envision an offering in your game. If, like me, you have a background that suggests that there's only specific moments in your calendar that this happens, base your game on that. The players will love the fact that they know what's happening, they know what's going on, and they understand it. Don't try to be weirder just because the Feywild has to be strange. It is strange on its own. Add your background strangeness to the Feywild strangeness and create your own strange wild. Next episode, we will talk about the inhabitants of the Feywild, the main inhabitants, or the famous Fey courts. We will go into detail later during the series, but the next episode is devoted directly to the summer, winter, autumn, spring, and more courts. So if you liked this video and are waiting for the next video, please hit subscribe, leave me a comment, leave me a thumbs up. It helps visibility of this channel and helps me expand and know if I'm doing something right or wrong. So I appreciate every feedback that you can give, and I hope to see you around next week for the next Basically Feywild. Take care.